the KKK has acts with impunity, and the conservative Democrats are back in the saddle again, and that's sort of that, right? And so Reconstruction ends, in that sense, not with a bang, but kind of with a whimper, right? We just sort of gradually, it's like the tide going out of the beach. It just gradually recedes until it's just gone, and that's that, right? And so a few other things we can talk about. The economics of it all, we haven't talked about. And so initially, slavery, to put it very bluntly, is a system of labor, right? It's a way to get labor from people, right? The way we get labor from people today is we pay them money, right? You go get a job, your boss will say, okay, I need you to do whatever, and in return I'm going to pay you this much, right? And then presumably we pay you some amount of money relative to what you're doing, and if you will be willing to take the money for that, you do it, you get paid, right? And so it's a pretty okay way to get labor from people. Turns out I like money, everyone likes money. Money's sort of a big deal. And so slavery works the same, except instead of money, we use violence, right? Instead of me saying, I'll pay you to do this, instead what I do is I say, do this thing or I'm going to beat the crap out of you, and then when you don't do it, I actually will beat the crap out of you. And at the very core, basic level, what slavery is about is the threat or the use of violence to get labor from black people, right? And so there was this whole story told by Southerners that slavery wasn't actually that violent. There was no, you don't want to hit slaves. That's bullshit. They did it all the time. Of course, you don't want to beat a slave to death. They're money, right? You paid for them. But you did it as much as you needed to do it in order to get the labor that you needed to get from them. And so an averagely good field hand was expected to pick 100 pounds of cotton a day, which is a tremendous amount. And if you didn't pick that much cotton, they kept track, and if you didn't, you'd get beaten. Most plantations would keep, they'd weigh the cotton, everyone picked at the end of the day. You had to weigh it so you know how much you had anyway. So instead of weighing it all at once, we would weigh it as every slave came in from the fields, and we make a note. And we say, okay, well, you picked 76.8 pounds today, you better pick more than that tomorrow, or we're going to whip you. And once you hit that 100-pound mark, they would say, okay, don't ever pick less than that. And if you didn't, you would get beat. And Chris Rock had a comedy skit about this years and years ago where he said, I'm quite certain the first guy off the boat did not want to pick cotton, and then out comes the whip, and they beat the living crap out of him, and the second guy's like, yeah, no, I'll tell you, where do I go, right? Where is that happening? And so the first time that you see someone you know held down and beaten within an inch of their life, suddenly picking cotton doesn't seem like a really bad option anymore, right? And so that's fundamentally what slavery is about. One of the more recent historians who wrote a book about it, a guy named Edward Baptist, called it a whipping machine. It was essentially a sort of a social machine, right? A social construct that produced cotton by means of whipping, right? Well, so the big question in the post-Civil War South is that the slaves are free, so like, what are we going to do now? Right? The whole way that we organize every aspect of our economy is gone, right? And so what are you going to do? In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, a lot of white Southerners proposed labor contracts, right? And in that little twilight period where the black coats come around, where Reconstruction hasn't started and the Civil War's over, most freedmen are, for a variety of ways, coerced into signing these because they feel like they have to, because they get coerced into doing it. And basically the idea is, if I have a plantation, I have to bring in the cotton or I go broke. You need jobs because you have to eat, so I'll pay you to work on the plantation. Instead of you being my slaves, I'll just pay you cash, right? Or at the end of this, I'll sell the cotton and pay you guys cash out of it, right? And so it seems like it's a fair deal. Of course, the devil's in the details. But there's a few things. First, as you might imagine, a lot of freedmen don't want to do that, right? They want to work for a living. They're totally fine doing that. For a freedman, working to earn a living would be in and of itself a big deal because you've never been allowed to do that. So that would be pretty satisfying to go have a job and get paid and support your family. But on the other hand, you got to eat, right? But they don't want to do that thing. Well, they don't have a choice, right? So lots of freedmen go to work on the plantations again. And the contracts are not what you would say fair. A lot of them allow the former plantation owners, the planters, to chain people together into gangs to get them to work at the same pace, to use things like whips or corporal punishment to enforce discipline, to sort of dictate things about how people are able to live. For example, like you have to live on the plantation in these cabins that used to be for slaves but aren't now, but you're going to live in them anyway. And as you might imagine, it's basically the same as being a slave, except I'm just going to pay you later, right? And it's not going to be very different. Well, when the freedmen's bureau comes along, that tends to go away. That's one of the big things that they do in the early period of Reconstruction is toss out these labor contracts, and they sort of invalidate a lot of them, right, as being illegal. And so you're left with a question: so what do we do, right? What do we do now? And so the big thing that ends up happening is a system we call sharecropping, right? And so it's kind of confusing because often you get things called tenancy, tenant, like when you rent an apartment, you're the tenant, right? And sharecropping and tenancy are like related but different. In tenancy, you would pay rent, right? And this makes it's perfectly rational. I have a plantation, it's huge, I grow a bunch of cotton, and it's just me and my wife and my one kid, right? I can't work a 2,000 acre plantation, right? So I'll hire you guys, and instead of you working on the plantation, I'll just divide it into chunks and I'll rent each of you a chunk, right? And at the end of the year, you do whatever you want, but you just pay me rent, right? You pay me $500. I don't care what you grow, presumably cotton, because we all grow it or whatever, and then you just pay rent. That would be tenancy, right? And so think of it as like if you own a shopping mall, right? If you're the company that owns the mall, you would rent space in the mall to stores, and you say, okay, well, you can sell whatever you want as long as it's not illegal, obviously, and then you just pay me a monthly rent, and I'll keep the lights on, and I'll have a security guard, and you have a physical storefront that people can come to, and the more stores in the mall, the better it is, right? And so sharecropping is a little different. In sharecropping, what we're going to do is that I'm going to divide the plantation into chunks, shares, you might imagine, and you guys are going to farm them. It's the crop part of the sharecropping. And in return, what's going to happen is you're going to farm. Some of it is whatever you want to eat. You've a garden, but some of it's going to be cotton, right? And then at the end of the year, we're going to harvest all the cotton, and we're going to pile it all up, and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to keep track of how much each of you gave me, right? And when we sell it, we'll divide it up that way, right? And I'll take a percentage of the cotton profit, and I'll give the rest back to you, right? And so basically, what's going to happen is you're going to pay me in crops, right? And so really, I guess I'm going to pay you because you're going to make the cotton, and you're going to give it to me, and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to return some of that to you as money, right? And so we should say, on the surface, there's nothing particularly exploitative about this, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be exploitative, but like, oh, but wait, right? And so the trick is, of course, first of all, I'm going to sell the cotton, right? You're not going to sell it and give me half or 25% or something like that, because then obviously you'd sell the cotton for as much as you could get, right? Instead, what will happen is I'll sell all the cotton and I'll give you a percentage, right? So the control passes to me. And as you might imagine, I don't really have an incentive to sell the cotton for a lot of money because I'm going to take what I'm going to take and give you the rest. Once I have enough cotton to make sure that I can pay my bills plus some left over, if the cotton can sell between 3 and 5 cents a pound, well, the 3.5 cents a pound is enough. I'll just sell it for that. You might obviously want to sell it for more, but I'm the one making the deal, right? Particularly what I might do is go to a cotton broker and sign up what's called a futures arrangement, where I agree to sell him cotton next year for a certain price, which is good for him because if the market price is higher, then my price might be lower and he makes money. He can buy the cotton for me and then resell it for more. And of course, that's bad for you guys because you want to negotiate the highest price you can. I've already negotiated maybe a lower price than you can get, maybe higher, maybe lower, right? But again, that's not the way this works, right? On top of that, what's going to happen is usually I take like a fixed percentage of the cotton. Like I don't take a certain amount of money. I don't take like $500. I take like half of what you produce. So then it doesn't even really matter whether or not we get a good price or whatever. I'm just going to take half of what you make, whatever it is, right? On top of that, there's some other little hooks too. Cotton farming is expensive. You have to have a mule, you need a plow, you need seeds, you need fertilizer, you need a cotton gin to harvest all the cotton, right? Now, you have to buy them from me. That's in the contract that you sign. You have to buy them from or rent them from me, right? I have a cotton gin, I have a mule, I have a plow, I will get the fertilizer, I'll get the cotton seed, you buy all that from me. What I do, of course, is I buy it wholesale from a guy down the road, and then I resell it to you at a much higher price. Right? And so you get fertilizer for $2 a pound, I buy it for $2 a pound, I sell it to you guys for $7 a pound, right? Now, you don't have cash on hand, most farmers don't, right? They don't have a lot of money, so where are we gonna get the money? Well, it's fine, I'll just keep track of what you borrow from me during the year, right? And at the end of the year, when we sell the cotton, I'll take my fee, and then the rest I'll also return to you minus your expenses, right? Minus everything that you needed during the year, right? And so as you might imagine, that's where the exploitation can happen, right? So at the end of the year, say, gosh, we had a good year, the cotton sold for a high price. It looks like you had, let's say $1,000 worth of cotton off of your share of the plantation. So I'm gonna take $500 for me, that's rent, and then you borrowed $385 worth of stuff for me, so you keep $115, right? And so you keep slightly more than 10% of the net of the gross profit. Or on the other hand, let's say we had a bad year. We sold the cotton for say, $800. Well, I take half, that's $400, and now that $385 means you're left with a mere $15. Or let's say it sells less than that, and you end up owing me money, right? The cotton sells for $600. I take half, and now you're in the hole for $85. Well, you just worked for me for a year to owe me $85, right? so you don't have that kind of money, obviously. So I say, well, gosh, what can we do? If you have 85 bucks, cough it up, and we can go our separate ways, firm handshake, have a nice life. On the other hand, what can we do if you don't have $85?
You gotta keep working.
You can just work for me next year, it's no big deal, right? Next year, we'll just sell the cot, I'll take half, and then I'll just, whatever you borrowed from the year plus the 85 bucks from last year, just carry right over, right? And so you can literally work your entire life as a sharecropper and die with negative assets, right? Because as you might imagine, it's heavily related to the fluctuating price of cotton and the tools and all that stuff. And of course, when you realize sharecropping is not a system whereby we all make money and everybody wins. It's a system whereby you guys get tied to me in what we often call debt slavery, right? I don't actually want you to make money. I want you to make as little money as you can, even if it would make me less money, because then I end up with labor forever, right? I never have to worry about where my labor is coming from. If you think about slavery, you never have to worry where your labor is coming from in slavery because you own slaves, right? They're there, you own them, you can buy more. Well, now they're free, so what do? So sharecropping effectively replicates the economics of slavery in a way, but it's just a lot more complicated, right? It's a lot more to do with owing money and things like that. We just found a nice little loophole, right? And as you might imagine, if black people voted and were in control of things in, like, the state of South Carolina, they can ban crap like this. But after redemption, they're not. And so there's nothing they can do. You go to the court, and the judges are appointed by the state legislature, and they're not particularly friendly to you, because it's probably some Bourbon Democrat. And the state legislature is not particularly friendly to you, and the legal system's not particularly friendly to you, right? And so sharecropping is a way to essentially sort of tie people up in these exploitative sort of chains that are not physical chains, but work quite well nonetheless, right? And so we can add a couple of other hooks to it. We can mention vagrancy laws. And we could also mention convict leasing. And so let's talk about vagrancy laws. Most southern states pass a vagrancy law during the end or aftermath of Reconstruction. And so it's a very simple law. There's a couple variants. Sometimes if a police officer asks, you have to provide proof that you work somewhere, you have a job. Sometimes it'll be a yearly thing. You have to go to your local police official every year and say, like, here's a letter from my boss saying that I work for him, right? And so we should ask, under normal circumstances, does it really matter if you have a job or not? Do the cops care if you're employed? No, who cares? I mean, you might want a job to have money to buy things that you like, or food and stuff, so that's like not necessarily the police's main concern. But on the other hand, remember, when you look at the legal system in the post-Reconstruction South as a system less concerned with protecting people and more about exploiting black labor, vagrancy laws suddenly start to make a lot of sense, right? And so it's very simple. If you don't want a job, you're committing a crime, right? And here's the trick. The Bourbon Democrats are particularly wealthy and powerful. They're the influential guys in the post-Reconstruction South. If you open up a factory and you try to, say, poach sharecroppers away, right, by offering them a good job, the Bourbon Democrats can just stop you, right? You can't get a building permit. We'll sell you the land. You get tied up in the courts or something. And so if you are a freedman after Reconstruction, it turns out that maybe your only option is to become a sharecropper, or you're violating the vagrancy law. You can't just not work, right? You can't just go into the woods and become completely independent of the financial system. You have to have a job. And so this is the job that you have to have. And it works the other way too. If you're a sharecropper and you do stuff I don't like, do you have a question? If you have a question, I'll answer it for you. And so if you're a sharecropper and you do stuff I don't like, what can I do? How about you're fired, right? Oh, by the way, you're fired. Be off my property by sundown, and also I called the cops to let them know that you don't have a job, right? And so the cop comes around and is like, hey, do you have a job? And you're like, oh, I just got fired. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I guess I gotta run you in for the vagrancy law or wrong, right? And so should we say, is the vagrancy law applied to everybody equally? No, of course not. It's applied to people of the black persuasion, right? And so that's that, right? It's not intended to be a law that applies equally to everyone, right? It's one of those laws that sole purpose exists to sort of give the police this lever to use, right? And the legal system has these sort of hooks and this teeth to use, right? And so on top of that, you end up with convict leasing, which a guy won the Pulitzer Prize a couple years ago for a book about convict leasing. He went to a park in, I think, Alabama. There'd been a steel industry in Alabama in the 1870s and 80s that got started in particularly Mobile. Mobile didn't exist during the Civil War and was created after the Civil War because they found iron in the hills.